So I want to give you a little bit of background about myself and what my qualifications are to be standing here in front of you. I'm not a professional gardener. I'm not a botanist. I don't have a degree in horticulture. I'm not an ecologist. My degree is in software engineering. Any software engineers here? A few. Excellent, excellent. So what am I doing here? Well, 12 years ago, I was one of you in the audience, knowing nothing about native plants. You probably know more than I did 12 years ago, wanting to learn. And I was fortunate enough to discover the Native Plant Society, the Wildflower show that they hold every year, the 2 native plant sales that they hold every year. And we, quite by chance, saw the sign, got off the freeway, bought 2 plants at the plant sale, brought them home. Long story short, the plants really did well in my garden. And so that, my yard was pretty unattractive. Lawn in front, lawn in back, but not watered, not maintained. And our neighbors were very tolerant, but I'm sure they were complaining to themselves. This guy's driving down our property values. So we were looking for something different that would look nice, be low maintenance, easy to maintain, and fit in with our lifestyle, with 2 jobs in the household, not enough time to spend on maintaining the yard and so on and so forth. And the first 2 plants we bought that lived told us that we were planting the wrong kind of plants earlier. And so that's how I got interested in native plants. That was about 15 years ago. And about 11 years ago is when we really took the plunge and we landscaped the front yard and the backyard entirely with native plants. We kept about 5 fruit trees and 1 jasmine vine, but we got rid of the lawns and everything else. And I can't tell you, it's the best thing that I ever did, because it started for me a journey of discovery and learning and surprising facts that I learned along the way that really has had a big change on my life. And I don't expect it to have the same impact for everybody else, but I'm here to share with you what I've learned in the last 10, 11 years. And I'm hoping you're going to learn from my mistakes and that your journey will be smoother. So with that qualifier, this is what I hope to cover today in the next hour. We're going to talk about what's a native plant, basic definition. We're going to talk about locally native plants. That's the title of today's talk. And it's a little bit of a specialized subject. So we're going to explain or enumerate the benefits of native plants and the benefits of locally native plants. And then we're going to get into the heart of the presentation. So I've got a lot of plants to share with you today. And I've categorized them in order by height or size. And I'm going to go from the largest to the smallest. And there's a reason for that. If you watch over the shoulder of a landscape designer while they're doing their work, you will observe that the first thing they lay out is the hardscape, where the paths are going to go, the bird path, the water features, the walls, all of that. They figure all that out first. But when they're ready to put plants in that design, they put in the biggest plants first, starting with the trees. These are going to be the largest things in your garden, and they're going to be the longest lived in your garden. And it's very difficult to change your mind if you planted a big tree in the wrong place, right? You're going to set yourself back by 10 or 20 years. So you start with locating the largest plants first, then you do the shrubs and the vines, then you do the perennials, and the annuals come last because they're the easiest to locate. They have a short lifespan. They usually are very, very colorful in the garden. And you can have a very, diverse selection of annuals in your garden. You can have different ones in different years. It's completely up to you. So the cost of making a bad decision with the annuals is much less than with the large plants. So that's the reason why we're going to go through them in this order. And while we're going through them, I want you to be thinking about your own garden, that spot, empty spot you want to fill, and ask yourself, is this going to work for me? We will conclude with a short list of recommended books, some resources, and some local events that you might find of interest. So let's quickly talk about what's a native plant. I've got several definitions here, and I want you to pick them apart. First definition is any plant that occurs and grows naturally in a specific region or locality could be considered a native plant. So if you think about this, this is generally certainly true of native plants, but it's actually true of several non-native plants. So, for example, I give you the example of eucalyptus, right? It's from Australia, but it's found naturally occurring now all over California. 100, 150 years ago, it was planted, sometimes in ones and twos, sometimes in entire groves, sometimes entire hillsides were covered with it. It was thought that it was a good lumber tree, but they did all this planting well before they actually tested that theory out. Turns out to be a really bad lumber tree. It's a really poor replacement for redwoods, for example, which are good lumber trees. The issue with the eucalyptus is that it has naturalized in California. That means when it drops seeds, the seeds germinate and grow. And I've seen pictures of various creeks in San Mateo County. 30 years ago, there were 1 or 2 eucalyptuses, and 30 years later, the entire creek bed there's a row of eucalyptus. So it naturalized in California. It occurs and grows naturally now without any human assistance, but it's not a California native plant. So that definition doesn't go far enough. Another definition, a plant that naturally occurred in an area before disturbance by humans. Could work, right? It depends on what you define disturbance. So in the last 400 or 500 years, there's been a lot of disturbance of the soil in California. But prior to that, there were still human beings living in California. And they were not sitting idle. They were actually doing farming in their own way. They were digging up bulbs, which they ate for food. In the process of digging up bulbs, they were distributing the bulblets, which actually benefit from that disturbance, and the bulblets mature into bulbs much faster when they've been dug up like that. Native Californians were actually actively transplanting seeds from place to place and planting things in places where it doesn't naturally occur on its own. So this definition is mostly good, but when it's applied to native Californians, they've been disturbing the landscape for many, many years. So it's not strict enough. So today, the third definition is the generally accepted one. A plant that was growing in California prior to the arrival of Europeans is the generally accepted definition of a California native plant. Some more notes about native plants. You understand that every plant is native to some place on earth. A plant's native range can be very small or can be very large. We have plants that occur all over the northern hemisphere, in North America, in Russia, and Asia. And on the other hand, we have plants that occur only by Anderson Reservoir in Santa Clara County, not found anywhere else on earth. So both kinds of plants are native to California. One has a very limited range, the other has a very wide global range. In a large state like California, every native plant is not found in every corner of the state. Some are, many are not. And that brings me to the topic, the title of today's talk. So when you're talking about native plants, you have to always ask native to where. And if I was talking to my relatives in India, I would say native to California, and that would be good enough for them. But if I'm talking to you, you would be wise to ask me, native to which part of California? Northern California, the deserts, Southern California, the Central Valley, the Sierra Nevada. There's so many parts to California. And today, I'm going to talk to you about plants that are native to Fremont. A few slides on why native plants, what's the big deal about native plants? Why they are beneficial. I think they're very beautiful, and I hope when you're looking at the pictures in these slides, you will agree. They're beautiful, not so well known in California as they are in Europe. They're economical. If you grow native plants, they need less maintenance, less input, less water. They don't need chemicals or spraying, and they save you money. And they're really good for the environment, and I have more slides talking about this particular benefit. This, in my mind, is the real big deal. So they reduce pollution because they don't need all the extra chemicals. They provide habitat. They provide food and shelter to local animals and wildlife. A few slides on habitat value will hopefully explain to you how they provide habitat. You learned this in grade school. Plants are at the bottom of the food chain, right? There's inert material. There's nutrients in the soil and minerals and all those things. But plants, through sunlight photosynthesis, are the first living organisms that are able to combine these nutrients and produce food out of that, and produce seed out of that, and regenerate and propagate. Those plants are eaten by higher levels of life, starting with insects, and birds eat insects, and higher mammals eat the lower life forms. So underlying that whole web of life, at the bottom of that web of life is plant material. What makes native plants special is that native plants have co-evolved with native animals and insects and birds over thousands and thousands of years, and they have adapted to each other. And that process of evolution or co-evolution is very hard to replace. And I'll give you some examples. We have certain kinds of animals that are highly specialized and codependent on certain kinds of plants. In the top right picture, I've got a image of the caterpillar of a very beautiful butterfly called the pipevine swallowtail. It's found in California. From a certain angle, the leaves look just black, but when the light shines just right, it's iridescent, purple and blue. Is the most beautiful butterfly you've seen. The butterfly has no mandibles, has no jaws, right? So it gets its food through its proboscis that it's able to insert into flowers, and it lives on the nectar of flowers alone. That's the butterfly. But when the butterfly reproduces, it lays eggs which hatch into caterpillars. Caterpillars don't have that tube. They have jaws, and they need to chew. They need to eat stuff. The pipevine swallowtail will get nectar from every kind of flower available, native or otherwise, doesn't care, right? But when it has to lay its eggs, it's looking for the California pipevine. When a butterfly lands on a leaf, you see it moving its legs, I call them, arms, whatever. It's got tiny needles in those arms that it's puncturing the surface of the leaf, and it's sensing what kind of chemicals are present in the leaf. And if the chemicals are just right, it knows this is the right plant, I'm going to lay my eggs here. The caterpillars of that butterfly will only feed on the pipevine, on the California pipevine. They will not eat the leaves of any other plant. So you can imagine if we were to lose this pipevine from the state, we would essentially lose the butterfly, because they would have no way to reproduce and make caterpillars. So this is just one example of the codependence. Not every insect or animal is as highly dependent, but some are not. There's a entomologist, an insect specialist on the East Coast who's written a lovely book called Bringing Nature Home. And it's all about why native plants are important for the environment, especially wildlife. Douglas Tallamy is his name, and he's doing research on exactly what kind of difference native plants make to these insects. So he's planting native plants in one plot, non-natives in another plot, and he's counting how many insects go to each plot. He's counting their numbers and their mass and so on and so forth. And the results of his study, which is still going on, partial results I published in the appendix of this book called Bringing Nature Home. And I've picked out some data that I want to show you to illustrate why native plants are important. Native plants in this particular study produced over 4 times more insect biomass than non-native plants. Remember that this study was done on the East Coast, right? Non-native plants have been present on the East Coast for at least 500-600 years ago. So the insects on the East Coast have had a long time to adapt to the non-native plants. But even after 500-600 years, given the choice between native plants and non-native plants, the critters still prefer native plants 4-to-1, right? Some more data. Native plants attracted more than 3 times as many species of insects. So we're now talking about biodiversity, not just the quantity of insects, but really how many different species. Native plants are capable of supporting much more diversity of wildlife than non-native plants. If you're interested in butterflies, native plants supported 35 times more caterpillar biomass than non-native plants. It's not even close. Insects come in two types. There are the generalist insects that really don't care whether the plant is native or not, and the specialists that are very particular about which plant it is. Even among generalist insects, native plants produce twice the biomass as non-native plants did. So basically, that's what the big deal about native plants is. They evolved here, they belong here, and they add more value to the environment. That's why they are desirable. So what's the big deal about locally native plants? And by now, I think you will understand locally native plants are plants that have evolved in the soil and the climate and the exposure of where you live. They offer the highest habitat value for local fauna. They're best suited to succeed in your location without requiring huge amounts of topsoil trucked from somewhere, amendments trucked from somewhere else, a lot of soil preparation, and so on and so forth. And the last bullet is really a personal perspective, which is when you plant palm trees in your garden, right? What sense of place are you evoking in your garden? That it's sunny, maybe it's coastal, maybe it's tropical. These are all locations of the earth where palm trees are naturally found, right? Southern California is full of palm trees, which are mostly planted. But over in the desert, by creeks in the desert, is where the California native palm tree is found. That's not planted often enough, but that's really the only palm that's native to California. The ones you see in LA are not native to California. So the last bullet is really about looking at your garden from the point of view of looking at the plants. What does this garden remind you of? What is the sense of place from this garden? I'm from India, and it would be wonderful if I could grow a lot of plants from India in my garden to remind me of home, right? But this is my home. I've lived here since 1982. And until 10 years ago, there wasn't a single plant in my garden you could point to and say, hey, that's a California plant. Your garden is located in California. So by including a locally native plant in your garden, you're really actually bringing that plant back to the spot where it probably usually was occurring naturally before that spot became a ranch or a subdivision or a tract home. So locally native plants belong here, and if you introduce them to your garden, you are saying very proudly, this is a California garden. Okay, so let's get on with the next. This is the heart of the presentation. And I'm going to go over the plants one by one. The handout has all the gory details of height and size and so on and so forth. I'm going to give you an overview. Many of these plants I've grown myself. Some of them I've seen in other gardens. We're going to start with the large trees. And I've got a mix of water-loving and, dry climate-loving plants. Big leaf maple, this picture is from Hidden Villa Ranch in Los Altos Hills. And this is growing right by the creek. Big leaf maples are found in riparian corridors by creeks and streams and rivers. They really like high water tables. They don't grow directly in the water, but they're just a few feet upland from the water. So if you have a garden that is either moist or is close to a creek, this would be a terrific plant. If you have a dry garden, be prepared to water this one. This is a deciduous tree. The leaves turn a beautiful, brilliant yellow in the fall. So if you like fall color, this would do really well. Its botanic name is macrophyllum. It is the world's biggest maple leaf. You would think it would be found in Canada, but it's found in California. So the big leaf maple, wonderful tree. We're trying to grow it at Lake Cunningham Park with not much success because it's very dry and very hot, even though there's a lake there. It needs summer watering, and we need volunteers to do summer watering. I decided to include this tree. It's not a garden setting. This is from Rancho Cañada del Oro County Park, south of San Jose. We were there for a hike in, I believe it was October, maybe November. And it was surrounded by the dark green of coast live oaks. This was this lone walnut tree, flaming yellow, very, very beautiful in fall. You're all familiar with Walnut Creek, right? This is the tree that gives that city its name. And Walnut Creek, in fact, is the only place in Northern California where this tree naturally occurs. It's not widespread. But when settlers came and agriculture began, they found that the English walnut or the Persian walnut that's commercially sold had a hard time in California soil. And when they grafted the English walnut to the roots of the black walnut, the native walnut, the plant survived much better. So all the walnut orchards that were planted in California, the rootstock was the native walnut. And the leaves of the two trees are very different. The commercial walnut has broad, round, lobed leaves. The native walnut is pinnate like a feather with very symmetrical leaflets. And many of those orchards have been abandoned now, and the rootstock has taken over. So you can often on the same tree see the British walnut and the native walnut side by side. This one has reverted to pure walnut, or maybe this one grew from seed. But it's very, very pretty tree for a home garden. Remember, it's deciduous, so if you want an evergreen tree, this is not the right one. It's among the larger trees. I think it grows to about 40 feet, according to my notes.
Is that the black walnut, like you buy black walnuts in the grocery store?
No, the walnut you buy in the grocery store is the English walnut.
Yeah, there's a walnut, and then there's black walnuts.
I haven't seen those, but I'm pretty certain it wouldn't be the native one. So the native one is mostly shell, is mostly wood, and the nut part is very, very small. So mostly the squirrels and the blue jays go for that.
They have a very different taste from the regular walnuts.
This tree is not commonly planted in gardens, but I think it deserves a mention. This is our local pine, local to our hills in the Diablo Range. This pine loves dryness and heat and slopes. It doesn't cast dense shade. It's very airy, so you can actually grow a lot of stuff at its base. Like pine trees, it's more tall than wide, but it doesn't have a pointy tip like other pine trees have. Its tip is more rounded, so it starts out being single-trunked, but after a while it's going to develop multiple trunks, and that's what give it its rounded shape on top. Has gray needles, fairly large cones, and if you go up hiking you're going to see a lot of it. But it's a good tree for the garden. Among the larger trees in my list, the coast live oak, I'm sure you've seen them. They live to about 500–600 years old. They support something like 93 species of life, all the way from tiny butterflies and wasps and insects to large mammals. For our long summer droughts, oaks tend to be islands of life because they provide nutrition and sustenance to critters when there's very little food available elsewhere. They're slow growing, so if you have the space, I encourage you to consider planting an oak tree. It's best to grow them from acorns. You need patience. And in your lifetime, if it gets to be 20 feet tall, you're doing great. There are many smaller versions that you can see in our public parks and all of that. So, and another option for managing a large tree like this is essentially you prune it for your conditions as it grows. And pruning when it's young is much easier and less expensive than when it's mature. And the last large tree, my favorite, is valley oak. So before Fremont and San Jose and the valley became developed and populated, it was essentially grassland studded with oaks, valley oaks, at large distances. So mostly grassland studded with oaks. It's called oak savanna for that reason. Valley oaks, unlike coast live oaks, love water. They can manage high water tables. So if you plant one of these, you can make it grow faster, stronger by regular deep water. They're deciduous. They have what I call crooked branches. Unlike the coast live oak, where many of the branches go for some length in one direction, valley oak branches are always zigzagging. And if you stand below a valley oak, you can usually see the sky through the leaves and the branches. If you stand below a mature coast live oak, sometimes it's so dense you can't see the sky. You will see this at low elevations. The higher up you go, the more likely you are to see black oak, which is not on my list, but that's also a wonderful tree. Question?
Yes, the city of Fremont planted trees around town. Everybody got a tree. And I believe they were sycamores, is that right? With the little spiny balls. Are those native?
There is a native sycamore, and there are many non-native sycamores. So a very commonly planted landscape tree is called the London plane tree, which is a species of sycamore, but it's a hybrid. It was developed either in Britain or Australia or someplace like that. But it's very popular with landscapers, and you see it planted all over the place. That's not native. it does hybridize with our native sycamore, and it's a cause of great concern to ecologists and biologists.
Well, I kind of wonder, is there somebody that, from your group or some related kind of organization that works with the city when they pick these things? And why, it seems to me, it takes less water and likes to grow here.
So since we're on the subject, let me talk about sycamores are riparian trees. So the western sycamore, which is native to our area, is only found near creeks and streams. So for the average city street, it would be inappropriate unless the homeowner there was prepared to water it. And one of the problems with planting riparian trees in the wrong place is first they need water. And secondly, when you water these riparian trees, their roots grow big and fat and they buckle to the sidewalk. So almost every case of buckling sidewalk is because of an inappropriate tree planted in the wrong place and overwatered. So the liquid amber, which is commonly planted, is a native plant from the Carolinas. It's a native tree of the Carolinas, where it grows in swamps. And you will see its roots are big and fat and essentially above the water and supporting the weight of the entire tree. That's its natural habitat. But we plant it in California because of leaf color. And we plant it in city streets, and to keep it alive, we have to water it. And its natural urge is to fatten its roots because that's what it does in North Carolina. So if you plant the right things in the right spot, you're not going to have these problems. So the native sycamore is a great plant if you've got a wet spot in your property. But otherwise, you have to be prepared to water it. Where I live on Tully Road, they planted 3 native sycamores in the landscape of a auto store, actually. And those plants are suffering. Those trees are suffering because they don't get enough water. They're beautiful, but they're suffering. So study your site, study your garden, find out the natural history of where you live. Before your house was built, what was it? Before it was a dairy ranch, what was it? What was found in that place? And there are resources I'll talk about at the end where you can find out about that.
Are the cities finally changing now?
I'm sorry?
Are the cities finally changing now to...
Yes, sorry, so I didn't address that part of your question. The situation today with agencies and city governments and so on and so forth today is such that native plants and the environment is the bottom of the list of priorities. How it looks, what people want, what people are saying at City Hall meetings is really the topmost thing. So to change that around, you not only need knowledgeable people from CNPS, but we need people from the neighborhoods to attend City Hall meetings or send letters to your city councilman and saying what you're saying to me. And when they get enough of that, they will come to CNPS and they will attach more weight to what we have to say. So CNPS is a volunteer nonprofit group. We are short-staffed. We don't have enough volunteers. We need you. We have the knowledge and the expertise, and whenever any city or any agencies wants us to review their lists, we are happy to do so. So we can provide that kind of assistance. But it's really, you have to take charge for your own neighborhood and go up, the channels of city government to make these points of view known. So every voice counts, every email, every letter counts, and our elected officials do pay attention. So it's happening more and more, but not enough is being done. I think a lot more could be done. This section is about small trees. One of you, I don't know, Chaya, is Chaya here? Maybe not. I got a request to talk about smaller size trees that would fit in small gardens. And here's my short list of small trees. The California buckeye, if you go out hiking, you will see specimens that are 30 feet tall, can get to be really big in the ideal spot. In the garden situation where you have more control over it, if you put it in full sun and moderate the amount of water you give it, it can be a very nice small tree for your garden. Why I really like it is that I find it attractive 12 months of the year. So this is a picture from spring. In early spring, when the leaves come out, bud out, every leaf bud is as beautiful as any flower. It's really pretty. In the springtime, it's covered with these candles of white flowers that are intensely fragrant. And the butterflies really love it, the native bees really love it. Honeybees, on the other hand, don't find its nectar helpful. They actually sort of get drugged, and if they have too much of it, they die. So if there are other nectar sources, honeybees will avoid this. But if this is the only flowering plant for miles, then honeybees in your area will get affected. So I've talked to several beekeepers. It's not been a problem. Our area is so developed, there are so many other sources of nectar that bee loss due to the buckeye is not an issue. And interestingly enough, none of the native critters or animals find this poisonous at all. They do just fine. Why it's not more often grown is because by July, August time frame, this tree has, all the leaves have dried up and fallen down. This is the California buckeye's adaptation to our long summer drought. Different plants have different adaptations. The way it survives the long summer drought is it says, okay, I'm going to drop all my leaves. I'm not dead. The fruit that I've formed, I'm still going to keep pumping food into the fruit. The fruit is going to get larger and it's going to mature, but I don't need the leaves, I don't have the water, so I can't afford to lose so much water. And I think that leafless, you could argue that it's even more beautiful than when it has leaves. This is a tree growing at the Rancho Santa Ana Botanic Garden in Southern California. And it's hard to see, but there's a bench behind it. And the bark is silvery white, and the branching structure is just beautiful to me. It's so architectural. You can prune it, you can shape it, you can water it. It's very, very amenable to garden conditions. So I planted 3 in my small garden. I'm going to have a hedge, a buckeye hedge. Another beautiful small tree. The western redbud is not a true tree. Trees are usually defined as having a single main trunk. The western redbud has multiple trunks. So it's really in the shrub category, but it's a very large shrub. It has these beautiful pink flowers in springtime, early spring. Then it gets very large heart-shaped leaves. And in the fall, it will have maturing pea pod type seeds that are ornamental in their own right. It's winter deciduous, and the seed pods will be the ornaments during the winter. Loved by native bees. You'll get a lot of insect life. This tree grows to about 20 feet tall in nature. I've seen it occur both by a little bit upland of creeks. It can tolerate shade, it can tolerate sun. In full sun, it's going to grow very slowly and be a small shrub for a long time. If you water it, it'll grow faster. If it's in a part-shade, moist situation, it's going to grow faster. It has masses of tiny white flowers that are a magnet for insects and butterflies and bees. You will see a ton of honeybees on every one of these native plants I'm talking about. Our honeybees are originally from Asia. They are true generalists. They don't care about native plants or non-native plants. They care about pollen, they care about nectar, and they'll take it wherever they get it. And they absolutely adore our native plants. The flowers will mature into cherry-sized fruit that turns purple in midsummer and eaten by birds and mammals and so on and so forth. It's an evergreen tree, so if you're looking for something that stays green the year round, it looks very handsome and attractive 12 months of the year. So the leaves are shiny, green, crinkly with sort of tiny bristles on the edges. I haven't seen it, but I've been told that this is as malleable as privet. Some of you might be familiar with privet. It's actually a tree, but it's often planted as a hedge in, strip malls and stuff. And so if you need a hedge, you can keep this pruned as a hedge and really short, and it'll work just fine in that situation. And finally, my last small tree and my real favorite. This is called the blue elderberry, and it has changed names. Yeah, my slide has the old name, your handouts have the new name. So botanists get together every so many years and they change names of plants. So you may be suffering from a little bit of that here. The blue elderberry is also by nature a multi-trunk large shrub. That's how it's found in nature. In the home garden, you can prune away most of the trunks except for one or two main ones, and you can shape it as a tall, vertical, small tree. In the springtime, it has these beautiful sprays of cream flowers that are eaten by birds, by the way. The birds will come and snack on the flowers directly. They are going to turn into pale, small blueberries. Not the size of blueberries, but smaller. And the birds absolutely adore them. We planted a lot of them at Lake Cunningham. And every elderberry tree there, and when it's in fruit, it's like a cafeteria for birds of all kinds. It's just darting in and out, and the busy snacking. They absolutely love it. It's deciduous, so in the wintertime, don't expect any shade from this. But, that's usually not a problem. In California, in the winter, you want sunlight anyway. So it's a really good plant, very fast growing. So if you want instant results, within 4 or 5 years, it's going to be 10, 15 feet tall. And it does need attention in the early years to shape it the way you want it. Its habit is that each branch is going to get mature and long and heavy and bend down. And then it's going to send up a shoot that will go straight up. So some of the side branches need pruning depending on how much space you want to give it. So it does need some attention in the beginning. Question?
Are any of the citrus trees native to California?
None of the citrus trees that we are familiar with are native to California. They are mostly from China, and they like sunny but moist conditions. They grow well in California, provided there's irrigation. So all the citrus farming we do, there's quite a bit of irrigation there. I have a small section on vines. California is not particularly diverse in the number of vines, and I've limited my selection here to just 3. There's more, but these 3 are the easiest. This is called the chaparral clematis. Beautiful flowers in the springtime. Goes completely dormant by about August. The leaves have all turned yellow. And in nature, you won't even know it's there except for its seed heads are like little cotton balls. So it's draped over a toyon, or it's draped through a coast live oak. And for the rest of the summer, you're not going to know the vine is there except that the seed balls are hanging up there. They look like they're fruit of the tree or the shrub, but it's actually this vine. So it looks decorative. In a garden, I put it both on a trellis, but also one of them has found its way through to my coast live oak. So now it's climbing up the coast live oak very happy. And it looks better there than it does on the trellis, because on the trellis it's kind of dry. So I planted shrubs in front of the trellis to sort of take away from the focus on brown. We have a number of honeysuckle vines native to California, and I grew this for a while. It has beautiful pink flowers at the tips of each one of those branches. usually found by creeks and streams. It likes more moisture than I was willing to provide it. But if you look carefully, right there is habitat. Hummingbirds absolutely adore it. The pink flowers will turn into red berries that the birds like to come and eat. California has a number of native grapes. The one that grows naturally in our area is called Vitis californica. And the one in the picture was thought to be native when I acquired it 11 years ago. Has since found to be a hybrid of the native grape and a wine grape from France. And it's the wine grape that actually gives it its color, the red leaves. The native California grapevine turns yellow in the fall. This one is, the trade name is Rogers Red, named for Roger Raish, who discovered this thing growing in the wild in Sonoma County. And even though he propagated it and sold it, he always doubted that it was totally native. And it took him, I think 15 or 20 years to have geneticists analyze the DNA, and they could pinpoint exactly who the parents were. So I've kept it. I'm trying to get the native yellow one too, but it has beautiful red color in the fall. It has tiny grapes. The seed is large and the flesh is small, so they're not good for eating or snacking as much, but they make great juice. The best juice. You got to try it sometime. You take a bunch, you crush it, you filter it, and it's like wine. Better than wine. Okay, so now we move on to shrubs. There's a lot of suggestions here. I'm going to go over these more quickly. But I have some real excellent plants in here. When I started hiking in California, one of the first plants that I was struck by were manzanitas. They are so characteristic. Their bark is a certain color, is really hard and dense wood, but absolutely polished, soft to the touch. And I just enjoyed seeing them and touching them and feeling them. For me, it was a very sensory experience. So when I started planting natives in my garden, I had to have a manzanita, even though it's not found in the valley where I live. But it's found up on all our hillsides, above a certain elevation. You're going to see big berry manzanita. So I had to have it. It has beautiful white, pink flowers in the winter. When there's very few flowering plants, manzanitas are flowering. And there's a close-up of the flowers. They're upside down urns. The opening is at the bottom. And is designed for insects or tiny ants or hummingbirds. Because hummingbirds are the only birds that can hover underneath, get their beaks in there, and get at the nectar. Designed for them. In this slide, I want you to look at the plant in the foreground to the left. This is a sagebrush plant. Sagebrushes are not known for their flowers, but more for their foliage and even their smell. If you touch them, they have an intense sage aroma. And another common name for this plant is cowboy cologne. When you go out in the wild, you come back smelling of sagebrush. This particular variety is not local. It's actually from the Channel Islands, and it grows prostrate, just horizontal. The local variety that grows here is a shrub. So usually maybe 3-4 feet tall, really tough plant. Doesn't need anything from you. In a garden situation, you would want to prune it about once a year, but it looks beautiful in the springtime when the new leaves come out. It's very fragrant, and the hotter it gets, the better it looks. It's just an amazing plant, loves heat. Great for slopes. If you have a hillside or a slope you're trying to stabilize, this would do really well. One way to design with native plants like this is really to have contrasting textures and colors side by side. Even though there aren't flowers in this plant to look at, The flowers are very small. They're not very showy. You can plant this next to any shrub that is dark green, and the gray and the green will look good 12 months of the year. So there's ways to design your plants, your garden, that will look pleasing and attractive 12 months of the year, even though there's no flowers. This is one of my favorites, coyote bush. You've probably seen this. It's a really tough native plant. You see here a female plant in seed. And as the seed matures, those little white tubes are going to open up, and the seed will essentially blow away with the wind and collect somewhere, and new plants will be born. Coyote bush is evergreen, very amenable to pruning and garden care. I've found that it is a little bit touchy with water. It doesn't like to be watered in the summertime. So if you have a dry spot in the yard, this would work really well. There are two forms. There's a shrubby form that can get 8 to 10 feet. Maybe not 10, maybe 8. There's a trailing or dwarf kind that can get either a foot tall or up to 3 feet tall. I have several of these in my garden, and they're utterly low maintenance. The only maintenance they need is about once a year pruning to keep them the size I want. So this particular variety comes from Pigeon Point, which is on the San Mateo County coast. There's another variety that's even shorter. It's called Twin Peaks. And if you ever go up to San Francisco, drive up to Twin Peaks and you'll see lots of it there. And it's evolved in that condition to naturally be flat and trailing rather than vertical. Same plant, genetically.
If something's growing well in a coastal area, like you said that was, does that mean it won't do so well where it's somewhere that's dry and not coastal, like here?
In general, yes. So a plant taken from Pigeon Point can't assume it's going to do well in Fremont.
Right.
I've grown it in San Jose, which is a few degrees hotter, and I can vouch that this plant from Pigeon Point grows really well in San Jose.
Okay.
The times it suffers is when accidentally you deep water it in the middle of the summer, and it will decide it's had enough, and one branch will die 2 days later. It's happened to us at Lake Cunningham. So now we know to leave it alone, not water it. But the local variety, the Fremont variety, is the taller shrub. I just wanted to include this to let you know the diversity that is available. So you're right, this is not strictly a local native. California buckwheat. California is sort of God's botanical laboratory or evolutionary laboratory for manzanitas. We have the world's most number of different species of manzanitas in California. For ceanothus, we have the most kinds of ceanothus growing in California than any other place on earth. And the third one I was going to say is buckwheats. We have lots and lots of different kinds of buckwheats. There are annuals, there are perennials, there are shrubs. This particular one is local to our area. It's called California buckwheat, or Eriogonum fasciculatum. It's about 3 feet tall, and it flowers. It's been budding in my garden since last month, but now the flowers are becoming more prominent. So by the end of July, it'll be in full bloom. And it's covered with insects, with flies and wasps and butterflies and bees. I've seen insects on this plant that I didn't know existed, let alone in my garden. But if they find one of these buckwheats in the summertime, that's where they're going to go. It's a great plant. In nature, what it does is it will grow, flop over, the stem makes contact with the ground, it will root again and grow again, so it will slowly expand and grow. That's what it does in nature. In a garden situation, what I do is I cut it down to the ground about 2 or 3 inches. Just completely chop it down in December. And next year, I get all the stems are brand new, and it has this nice round shape for an individual plant. And that's how I like it. So depending on your conditions and what kind of look you want, you can manage this plant. This plant is also very sensitive to summer water. So once it's established, just leave it alone. Do not water in the summer, otherwise you risk losing. It's a really, really nice plant for the garden. Should be grown more often. California coffee berry is a larger shrub. There's several varieties available. It has dark green leaves that look very presentable and neat 12 months of the year. It's not deciduous. It's a good barrier plant. Will do well in shade, will do well in sun. The berries in this picture are not mature yet. They're still sort of reddish. When they're fully mature, they'll be a dark chocolate purple color. They're not edible by humans, but the birds and the mammals really love them. Amenable to garden care, you can water it, you can prune it, you can do whatever you want with this. My absolute favorite is toyon. So some of you may be familiar with pyracantha, that has red berries. Cotoneaster has red berries. This is our native red-berried plant, and not to be mistaken for the other two, which are non-natives. This one does not have thorns like pyracantha does. Its leaves are much larger than pyracantha. And its leaves are not two-toned like Cotoneaster leaves are two-toned. And its leaves are larger than Cotoneaster. And the toyon leaves are serrated. They have little teeth on the edge. And they're fairly large. The veins are very prominent. This plant is my favorite because it looks good 12 months of the year. In the wintertime, it's full of red berries that the birds love to eat. Cedar waxwings, you'll get droves of cedar waxwings spending minutes in the shrub gorging, then they fly up and they digest the berries and then they come back down, they gorge some more. In the springtime, late spring is when it has tiny white flowers, also very attractive to look at and very attractive to insect life, full of nectar and pollen. Those flowers will turn into green berries in about June time frame, and they will mature to this brilliant red by November, December. This plant is found all over California, except for the deserts. It's found everywhere else. And if ever we get a state shrub, we don't have a state shrub today. This is the prime candidate. So when that day comes, I need all of you to write letters to make this the state shrub. You know, Oregon has a state shrub. It's called Oregon grape. It's a California native, but they... So we need our own state shrub. This is a sub-shrub. So in the shrub category, there's small ones and there's big ones. This is definitely one of the small ones. You've seen this if you've ever gone driving in the hills, you know, in the April, May time frame. It's up on these hillsides, road cuts, and it's got these, the color is neither yellow nor orange. It's smack in the middle. It's called sticky monkey flower because the leaves are sticky. And the hummingbirds and the native bees love it. In my San Jose garden, it's a challenge. I lose one about every 4 or 5 years. It just ups and downs. I haven't figured it out other than I don't have road cuts in my garden. So I think what it likes in my garden is a little bit of shade, not intense sun, and a little bit of summer water. And it goes for 4 or 5 years on that. So very easy to propagate. So one of the ways I compensate for it dying on me is to always have a few cuttings in gallon cans so I can replace one on short notice if I need to. You take a semi-woody cutting, remove the bottom leaves, stick it into moist soil, keep it moist for 6 weeks, it'll root.
You know, I read in the paper that if you cut back, or in the book, if you cut the dead flowers after it's flowered, that they will come back and you'll get another flowering later in the summer.
I haven't practiced it myself. I've read the same thing. And the theory behind that is basically that seed production. So not just flowers, but once it's pollinated, maturing that zygote or whatever into mature seed, viable seed, is a very energy-intensive process. Takes a lot out of the plant. So when you're deadheading a spent flower before it matures to seed, you're actually helping the plant conserve energy. So that might be the explanation behind
We'll
what
see, I
you're doing.
just did it today.
If it works for you, go for it. I'm too lazy to do that, but yeah. For the winter time, if you want something blooming in your backyard in the dark days of February, this is the plant to get. This is called golden currant. It's usually found close to streams but not in the water, a little bit upland. In my garden, it wanted a little bit of part shade. Was not very happy in full sun. And it really lights up the backyard in the winter when it's all shaded and dark and gloomy. It's nice to look out and see this flaming yellow flowers. They turn into translucent yellow berries. I have not tasted one of them, but I'm told that they're edible, hence the name golden currant. The golden currant is a large shrub, by the way. So depending on how much space you have, be prepared to prune it. This is a smaller plant. It's called chaparral currant and gets to about 5 feet tall. And in nature, like its name, it's found on sunny hillsides. And in the summertime, it becomes like the buckeye. It just drops its leaves. It's just a mass of sticks. In my garden, I put it in part shade, and it actually is very happy in part shade, and it retains its leaves, most of its leaves. And I spritz it with a little bit of water, maybe once a month or so. Keeps it green. In the winter, in December and January, is when it's going to form these candles or these hanging umbels of white pink flowers that are, again, loved by hummingbirds. They're designed for hovering or crawling pollinators. Very fragrant leaves, by the way. And a really beautiful currant is called pink flowering currant. Loves a little bit of shade, loves a little bit of moisture, not too much. Is deciduous, has beautiful hanging pink flowers in the springtime. Amenable to all kinds of pruning and shaping. I've seen wonderful specimens at the Lafayette Community Center where it was planted in a little planter box surrounded by concrete and next to a pole. It was beautifully planted and pruned to just grow vertically so that when it was flowering, the flowers were in your face and they look extremely decorative. So I encourage you to play with this one. Black sage, this is for all of us who love fragrance, who love good smells. Black sage is our local native sage, intensely fragrant. I planted it in the backyard and I put a bench right next to it. And when I sit on the bench, I don't even need to rub the leaves or anything. It's just the aroma is so strong. Really good habitat plants. We put it at Lake Cunningham and we find birds that are pecking at the seed heads. And a lot of ground-dwelling birds are actually snacking on the seeds at the bottom. I had to include this one in this plant. I'm still trying to grow this. I've killed about 5 of them. In nature, you're going to see this never by itself. It's a small shrub, maybe 4 feet. It's always growing next to a larger plant or in a nook or cranny somewhere. So it's always protected from intense heat or light. It has the most beautiful blue-purple flowers which turn into large berries. It's poisonous like other members of the nightshade family. So you don't want to consume any plant parts. But it's one of the smaller plants, will fit in many gardens and looks really nice in flower. All right, so that was the big one. Before we continue, how are we doing on time? We're good? Another 20 minutes or so? All right. I decided to include some grasses just to give you an idea. You know, if Fremont and San Jose were once grassland, what kind of grasses did we have? So I really love this particular grass. I have it as a specimen in my garden. I don't have a lot of them, but I have one that's lived in that same spot for 10 years, and each year it gets a little bit bigger. This is called California Melic, and it's, don't look at the truck, look at the, the grass in front of it. It has very pretty seed heads. When it matures, they're sort of shiny tan colored. And it looks very neat and orderly. It doesn't look like a weed. And it looks good all the way until December. And that's when I just chop it to the ground, and next year I get new growth from the same rootstock. One thing people don't know about our native grasses, most of our native grasses are perennials. They don't have a short lifespan. They live for years and years and years. And they have roots that go down really deep. So I've not seen it myself, but I've read that the purple needlegrass, which I'm going to show you, its roots can go down 50 feet in the ground. My house, two-storied house, is only 20 feet. So their strategy for survival was not the prolific production of seeds. Their strategy for survival was deep roots, long lives. And they were decimated when we brought cattle over from Europe. And they're nutritious, and the cattle ate off all the leaves. Well, if the plant doesn't have leaves, it can't make new food, and eventually it succumbs and dies. So grasses, in my garden, I use them not as lawn, but really as accents. And anytime there is a slightest breeze, these are the things that move in the garden on their own. So it gives my garden a sense of motion for no cost. This is the state grass, by the way. It used to be called Stipa pulchra, then they changed the name to Nacella, now it's back to Stipa. This is a lovely garden in, I'm thinking it's Danville. It's somewhere in Alameda County, the other side of the hills. And the backyard is a steep slope that the owner weeded and restored to 100% native. And here you're looking at needlegrass in its prime in spring. And it's a bit hard to tell in the photo, but the seed heads have this characteristic purple color, hence the name purple needlegrass. And they look very pretty in the breeze. We have a little meadow at Lake Cunningham that you can come and see. These are bunch grasses, not turf grasses. So there's individual plants planted a foot apart or something on this particular slope. This is a smaller grass than the other two that I've shown you, but I included it because I think it's really good for small gardens. It's called pine bluegrass or secunda. And why I like this plant is that it's more vertical than it is wide, so it fits in small spaces, loves full sun. And when it's in the springtime, it's all green, and when it forms its seed heads or flowers, they start out being blue or purple. Then they change color to green, and they eventually turn tan. So it changes color through the months. For the rest of the summer, it's mostly tan, but the seed heads stay in place and it looks neat and orderly. So I like to use this in the garden, and it also volunteers, so I make babies all the time. Lots and lots of perennials. We're going to go over this quickly. Yarrow is one of those circumpolar native plants. It's found in Russia and Asia and North America. The California variety in our state is white. There's one particular variety from the Channel Islands that's pink. Fragrant leaves. People make lawns out of this They can mow it and water it once a month in the summertime and stays green. Really loved by insects and butterflies. For the shady parts of your garden, consider growing Western Columbine. It has these really beautiful hanging lantern type of flowers that are designed for hummingbirds, which comes and gets the nectar, which is really at the tip of each of those pointy spurs. That's a modified leaf, essentially. And the nectar is in there, and she's got to fly up and get her beak into the spur. And in so doing, see all the anthers are going to hit its belly and transfer the pollen onto its belly, and then she goes to the next flower plant. If you love butterflies, you got to have milkweeds in your garden. This is the narrow-leaved milkweed. This picture was taken on Mount Hamilton Road at this plant growing in the garden. And for the first time in many years, monarchs were spotted in my garden, hovering around this bush. It's a great insect plant. You'll get beetles and honeybees and all kinds of other things coming to it. If you plant this, be warned that it's going to attract a lot of aphids, and that's completely normal, completely natural. And do what I do now. Don't fight them. Let them be. And 2 weeks later, it's going to be full of ladybugs that are going to be eating the aphids. The aphids will not harm any other plant because you've got the milkweed, that's all they care about. They're going to be glued to your milkweed. They don't destroy the plant, they suck its juice, and they, provide food for other critters. So it's a really beautiful plant, loves full sun, and likes a little bit of summer water. In nature, you're going to see it growing in flat places where there's a little seep. That's where you'll find this particular plant growing. I had to include this because I love this plant. You see this in the middle of summer, growing in areas that have been plowed and disked, and all kinds of horrible things have been done to the soil. This will be growing and flowering without any water. I mean, who made a plant? Who designed this plant? It's perfect for my garden. The flowers are mildly fragrant. The leaves are very, very aromatic. Some people don't like the smell of the leaves, but I love any kind of smell. The flowers last only for 1 day, okay? But if the plant is happy, you're going to see 10 or 20 flowers at any given time on the same plant. So it's a really very beautiful and decorative plant. It goes completely dormant in the summer. So I cut it back, and next year it's going to come back from the rootstock. A great plant for late summer. This is the California fuchsia. There's many varieties available. The local one is called Epilobium canum, and even within that, there's many varieties available. It has tubular red flowers that the hummingbirds absolutely adore. For maintenance, if you grow it in full sun, but in the wintertime it'll be dormant and look dead. You want to cut it down to the ground. For the shady spots in your garden, if you want some nice green ground cover, this is one of the 2 native strawberries native to our area. This is called...
Attention please. The library will close in 30 minutes at 9 p.m. If you need to apply for your library card, please go to the library card desk within 15 minutes. Or if you have questions about your library card account, please go to the checkout desk now. For help finding materials, ask at any information desk.
You heard that. Okay, we will try to finish in 7 minutes. This is one of the mother plants of the commercial strawberry that is grown and sold not only in California but exported everywhere else. Without the native gene, the European strawberries don't do well in California. So the native strawberry fruit is very, very small. It's edible, and the mockingbirds get it before I can get it, but it's fun to grow. It doesn't like full sun. It really wants shade. But if it's happy, it'll just cover the area. It grows very, very quickly. Also for the shade, California is home to many, many native irises. This one is local to our area. I know that it's found in San Jose. I've not been able to confirm Fremont. So you'll forgive me for including this. It loves shade, it's evergreen, and in the springtime for about 2 to 3 weeks you're going to have these beautiful purple iris flowers. For maintenance, it develops dead leaves over time. You can either yank the dead leaves off, or you can do what I do, which is just cut the plant to the ground in December. I do a lot of that in December, right? Cut it to the ground, and by April, it's full grown. It grows really rapidly after that. One of the summer flowering plants is called Lysingea, a great insect plant. If you look carefully, right in somewhere near the middle, you will see a honeybee getting at the nectar and the pollen. Coyote mint is a diminutive shrub. It's not a perennial, it's actually a woody plant, but it's only about 1 foot tall. And it has beautiful fragrance to the leaves. The leaves are edible. You can make tea out of the leaves. And it has these pink flowers in late spring, so about late April, early May. Beautiful flowers that are visited by bees and butterflies. Very easy to maintain. For the shady spots in your garden, consider hummingbird sage, which is a very aromatic, pleasantly so, perennial sage. It's not shrubby. And it stays low to the ground. The flowering stalks will come up about 18 inches of this beautiful pink color that the hummingbirds will come to. I grow it below my fruit trees where there's shade all summer long. But in the winter time, the sunlight is fine. And in the winter, I do prune this. You basically chop off everything except the bottommost leaf bud. Don't chop that one off. But that's pretty close to the ground. When you start seeing new buds coming, new leaves coming in late fall, that's when you want to do the maintenance or the pruning. This is a beautiful perennial that's really low to the ground. It's called checker bloom. And it has these beautiful pink flowers, and people who know a lot more about this than I tell me that this plant is the host plant for many kinds of butterflies. And I've seen it in my garden. I've never seen the larvae and so on and so forth, but I notice that the leaves are always eaten. Some leaves, there's always someone munching on them. Another summer flowering plant is called California aster. Great insect, nectar and pollen plant. The one in my garden is covered with honeybees in August time frame. I cut it to the ground in the winter again. Manage it like every other perennial. We're going to go over this really quickly. California has tons and tons of native bulbs, very beautiful ones. At one time, they were so popular in Europe that there were unscrupulous people digging them up and exporting them to the East Coast in Europe. And so that was the start of California passing laws to protect its native plants. So today we have laws that say you cannot dig plants out of the wild. That's an offense in California because people were stealing our bulbs. This is called meadow onion, loves full sun and really does great. I like bulbs because all the work involved with bulbs is at planting time. Once you planted them, for the next 10, 20, 30 years, you just enjoy them in the springtime. There's no maintenance on bulbs. When they're done flowering and seeding, they dry up and they're gone. And you don't know they're there until next spring or next winter they come back. So for lazy gardeners, bulbs are a great choice. Blue dicks, you see this on your hikes in the springtime. Very reliable bulb comes back. This one is an early spring, so probably March time frame is when it flowers. This is one of the toxic ones, the ones that the natives did not eat. This one is a beautiful white-flowered bulb. I've had it in the same spot for 10 years, and it's not expanded very much, but it hasn't gone away either. I really like how it looks. And this is a cousin, yellow flowered cousin. This particular variety is from Monterey County, but it's local to our area too. And also a cousin, but blue-violet colored, Ithuriel spear. Really easy to grow and manage. There's too much to cover in the short time we have available. I'll just show you some pictures. I encourage you to do some research on your own. This is called Farewell to Spring because it's one of the last wildflowers to bloom in any season. Its cousin, Elegant Clarkia, is taller and very lacy, frilly kind of petals. Chinese houses is for shade. If you have a shady spot, this plant will do really well. And to grow wildflowers successfully, you have to be sure not to mulch the bed you're growing them in. If you mulch that bed, the plants will grow fine after you plant them, but they will not come back from seed next year because mulch discourages germination. The California poppy is a gorgeous flower. I think we've all seen it, but not enough in gardens is my opinion. And I have a trick, which I will not tell you right now, but I have a trick to make this bloom 12 months of the year. So if you're interested, come talk to me afterwards. Or maybe invite me back for another talk. We devote it to the poppy. Globegilia looks beautiful with poppies next to it. You can see one sort of growing in the side. Goldfields, there are many kinds of goldfields. This one was common in the flats of Silicon Valley. And you don't see it anymore because we've just built up the area. It's become nearly extinct in our area. Seed is still available. You can buy seed and you can plant this. Really gorgeous. Tidy Tips, another very pretty annual. Meadow foam likes, like the name, likes flat, sunny areas where moisture is available. And there it will propagate and bloom vigorously. This particular bed was the second or third year of planting individual plants, about 3 or 4 of them. And all these came up from seed from that batch. Blazing Star is the name of our chapter's newsletter, and I think it's a well-chosen name because this has got to be one of the most beautiful flowers you've ever seen. The flowers are, the petals are satiny, really shiny yellow, and you can make out it's got 100 stamens, like a crown, with the orange reddish center. Very beautiful. It looks really good in a mass. It grows in hot, dry, sunny slopes in nature. So if you have a really tough spot in the garden, you're going to grow Blazing Star there. Seep monkey flower, like its name, likes a little bit of moisture and will reseed profusely if you let it. Wind poppy is a really pretty, diminutive, really small, about 6-inch tall wildflower for shady or part shade situations. Doesn't like full sun. And finally, cream cups, also a very beautiful flower that we've seen in the wild many times. Very easy to grow in the home garden. Just don't mulch and just neglect that spot and it'll come back the next year from seed. And so I want to encourage you to, when you're thinking about what to plant in your garden, do some research. You're going to be there for a while. You're going to live with your garden for a while. Find out what grew in that area before the homes were built, before the ranches were built, and so on and so forth. And there's ways to get that information. I encourage you to attend talks like this. A lot of what I've learned was not by going to a class, but by going to talks like this by people who know more than I did and asking questions. We have a symposium coming up. I'll tell you about it shortly. There are many, many good books on native plant gardening available now. I encourage you to get some and start there. In your garden, don't be ambitious. Try a few things. make some mistakes, and learn from them. You'll get to know what works for your site, what's unique about your particular garden. And it's always fun to do it with somebody. So your spouse, your neighbor, your friend, or whatever. But you can be exchanging notes, and most importantly, don't think of this as rule-based, that you've got to do this or you've got to do that. It's your garden, you can do whatever you want. I just want to encourage you that we have in California over nearly 6,000 different species of plants. It's an incredible diversity of options. Many of these plants can be grown in home gardens. Europeans, British, the French have been growing our plants for more than 100 years now. And many of our bulbs that are sold in the United States, California native bulbs, are actually being propagated by Dutch growers in Holland. And they export it to Connecticut, and then they're exported to California. California native bulbs. So I encourage you to learn more about this, experiment, try things out, and come back to these meetings and share what you're doing. Some suggestions for books. If you can buy only one book on native plants, let it be the first one. The three authors who between them have 90 years of experience, okay? It's like an encyclopedia or a reference. It's really well organized. There's a new book out, the second one in that list. It's called Month by Month Guide to Native Gardening, or maybe it's called California Native Gardening, a Month by Month Guide. Helen Popper is a professor at Santa Clara University, and she was attending our chapter meetings of Gardening with Natives, and she was assiduously making notes, and those notes have become the main content of this book. It's a delightful book. It's wonderfully written, wonderfully illustrated. But it really tells you, when you are doing native plant gardening, it's not difficult, it's different. If you're used to lawns and roses and camellias, then native plants can seem like a challenge or difficult, but it's not. It's actually much easier. You just have to know how they are different. And the book tells you what things are needed to be done to maintain which plants at what time of year. And it's really well written or organized. If you want to dig deeper, I encourage you to get the third book, which is How to Create Native Garden Designs Based on the Idea of Plant Communities. It's kind of connected to the whole emphasis on local natives. I'm encouraging you to grow local natives because they will really do well in your garden without much assistance, right? And the third book is really about figuring out that your garden is now located in what was once an oak savanna. And the plant community of an oak savanna is the natural plant palette for your garden. So what is that plant palette? How to design with it? That's what the third book talks about. The fourth book is a little booklet. If you're interested in habitat and butterflies and insects and birds, I encourage you to get one. We have one on raffle today, right? So there's a raffle. If you signed up, we're going to do a drawing, and one of you lucky winners is going to get that book. And for the botanically minded, if you get into this deep enough, you want to know what is truly locally native. There's a fantastic book written by a Stanford professor, Flora of the Santa Cruz Mountains, where he talks about all the plants that occurred in this area. And for each plant, he's got localities. He will tell you this was found in Alviso, this was found in Fremont, and so on and so forth. When you get that deep into it, I encourage you to get a copy of that for reference. Websites. So you want to know what grows in Fremont, go to calflora.org, and they have a link called What Grows Here. You type in your zip code and tell it that you want to know about the native trees that grew in this zip code. And it's going to go and find all it search its database and give you a list of...
The library will close in about 15 minutes. Please check out your library materials now and finish any printing or photocopies.
So calflora.org is a really useful one. Another useful one is laspilitas.com. It's a nursery down in Santa Margarita near San Luis Obispo. But they have a fantastic website full of information not only plant lists, but also plant communities and how to remove a lawn and all kinds of helpful information. If you aren't in touch with the local master gardeners, you should find out, because they have a really good handle on gardening for edible plants, vegetable gardening and so on and so forth. But they recommend organic ways of gardening without pesticides and natural methods. So they're a good resource. A professor at Berkeley by the name of Gordon Franke is doing research on native bees. You know, most of us know about the honeybee, right? This is one species. California has 1,800 species of native bees in California. Dr. Franke has created this website aimed at the general public. It's not just for his grad students, it's for people like us. And there's a ton of information there if you're interested in that subject. And 2 events I want to tell you about. On Saturday, September 29th, a chapter is going to organize a one-day symposium called Lawn Alternatives, Do-It-Yourself Native Plant Landscaping. So for those of you who are looking to do a bigger project, I encourage you to attend. There'll be 5 lectures, lots of breaks and lots of time to ask questions. This is going to be at Foothill College, and it's co-sponsored by the Hort Department at Foothill College. And our chapter does a native plant sale Saturday, October 21st, 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. at Hidden Villa in Los Altos Hills. I also want to encourage you, in your handout at the bottom, there's names of 2 local Fremont nurseries. So when you go shopping to the nurseries for native plants, I encourage you not to do impulse buying. Don't go in there and buy what you see or what you like. Do some research, make a short list, go and walk into the nursery with your list of plants you're looking for, because you've done your research, you know where you're going to put them in the garden. Ask them, do they have this? And chances are they're going to say, no, we don't. Ask them, can you get it for me? So there's a large wholesale grower in Watsonville that supplies all the local nurseries. His name is Suncrest Nurseries. You cannot go there and buy plants because you're not a wholesaler. But they will ship to Regan's, they will ship to Dale Hardware if the buyer in these nurseries asks them. So when you give them that plant list, they turn around and give it to Suncrest, and they get your plants within a week. They're there. So that's the trick to finding these hard to find plants, is you let your local nursery staff stretch themselves a little bit, and you help them out by giving them that information. Ask them, can you get it from Suncrest for me? And I think that brings us to the end.